So this is how the Basmala appears in the earliest Quranic manuscripts. In this video, we're going to examine the Basmala in early Quranic manuscripts. But before that, let's take a closer look at its historical background. Classical Islamic sources indicate that prior to Islam, the Basmala was commonly employed in the form Bismikallāhumma. It is evident that this expression was prevalent in 7th century Meccan society. Historical accounts often say that this wording was part of the boycott agreement against the Prophet Muhammad and his clan, Banu Hashim, and that it was posted on the Kaaba during a time of conflict and pressure in early Meccan Islam. The Prophet's approval of this phrase is particularly evident during the Treaty of Al-Hudaybiyah. At the beginning of the treaty, he initially dictated the expression Bismillāhir-Rahmanir-Rahīm, but upon objection from the Meccan polytheists, he agreed to replace it with Bismikallāhumma. Al-Zamakhsharī notes that the pre-Islamic Arabs frequently invoked their deities in similar formulaic expressions, such as in the name of Allat or in the name of Al-Uzza. This observation sheds light on the transformation of the Basmala over time, both in form and theological content. Early Islamic sources also note that the Prophet Muhammad regularly started his letters, messages, and treaties with Basmala. This repeated use highlights how important the Basmala was for expressing Islamic identity and religious ideas. A shortened form of the Basmala, namely Bismillah, is attested in the Qur'an in chapter 11. وَقَالَ ارْكَبُوا فِيهَا بِسْمِ اللَّهِ مَجْرَاهَا وَمُرْسَاهَا. This verse portrays the Prophet Nuh instructing the believers to board the ark with the invocation of Allah's name, emphasizing that both its departure and mooring occur by divine command. One of the earliest epigraphic attestations of the phrase Bismillah appears on Arab Sasanian coinage, minted shortly after the collapse of Sasanian Empire, marking a significant phase in the inscriptional use of Islamic formulas. These coins may be dated to the second half of the 7th century CE. A prominent example is an Arab Sasanian silver coin housed in the Vienna Museum of Art History. The obverse features a royal bust rendered in Sasanian style, accompanied by a Pahlavi inscription. Along the margin, however, appears the phrase Bismillah, inscribed in Arabic script. These coins are empirical evidence of how Islamic identity began to appear in public and economic life in early Muslim society. Although they used Sasanian designs, they gradually showed more Islamic language and symbols. The phrase Bismillah can also be seen on coins minted during the Umayyad period. We read the inscription at the center of this coin as Allahu Ahad, Allahu Samad, Lam yalid wa lam yulad, a passage composed of verses from Suratul Ikhlas, which concisely expresses the Islamic doctrine of divine oneness, Tawheed. Having these verses on coins, common objects that many people used, shows clearly how the early Muslim community shared and emphasized their belief in one God. On the coin's margin, we read the inscription Bismillahi ضُرِبَ هَذَا الدِّينَارُ فِي سَنَةِ سَبْعِينَ وَسَبْعِينَ, meaning in the name of God. This dinar was struck in the year 77. From this inscription, we understand that the coin was minted in the year 77 AH, corresponding to 696 CE. That this coin, dated to the final quarter of the first Islamic century, was minted under the official authority, renders it not only as a medium of economic exchange, but also a linguistic and administrative document of the early Islamic state. Bismillāhir-Rahmanir-Rahīm. When examined within the framework of Islamic literature, it becomes evident that the phrase Bismillah begins with an elided, mahdhuf verb. According to classical Islamic literature, while the specific verb may vary depending on the context, there is a widely held view that it is one of the following: Bada, meaning to begin, qirāʻa, meaning to read, or qāma, which carries the broader sense of to carry out or to undertake. Letter B at the beginning of the Basmala is a prepositional particle associated with this omitted verb. This particle is connected to the noun ism, meaning name, which forms a genitive construction, ibatha, with the divine name Allah. So the full expression may be interpreted as I begin, read, carry out in the name of Allah or by the name of Allah. According to Abu Amr al-Dani, there was a consensus among the qirā'at authorities and the masāḥif al-amsār, that is, the codices recognized as authoritative Quranic texts compiled under the caliphate of Uthman ibn Affan and distributed to major Islamic centers, that the phrase should be written orthographically omitting the alif. Similarly, according to Abu Bakr ibn Abi Dawud, there was likewise consensus within the Masāḥif al-Amsār regarding the orthographic omission of the alif in the word Ar-Rahman. The Basmala appears a total of 114 times in the Mus'haf. It occurs at the beginning of every surah, except chapter 9, Surah At-Tawbah. In addition, it is also found in chapter 27, verse 30, in the introduction of the letter that Prophet Sulaiman sent to Balqis. إِنَّهُ مِنْ سُلَيْمَانَ وَإِنَّهُ بِسْمِ اللَّهِ الرَّحْمَنِ الرَّحِيمِ. According to early scholars such as Sa'id ibn Jubayr, al-Zuhri, Atta bin Abi Rabah, and Ibn al-Mubarak, the Basmala is to be considered a verse at the beginning of each surah in which it appears. This view was also adopted by Imam al-Shafi'i and his followers. According to this opinion, the Basmala is counted as one of the 7 verses of Surah Al-Fatiha. The strongest supports for this opinion are the fact that the Basmala is written in the Mus'haf and different narrations affirming this. The Kūfan and Meccan schools of qirā'at likewise regarded the Basmala as a verse of Surah Al-Fatiha. In contrast, the second view maintains that the Basmalas found at the beginning of surahs are not independent verses. According to Madīnah, Shām, and Baṣrah schools of qirā'at, opinions also followed by the Hanafis, these Basmalas were not considered part of the surahs themselves, but were instead placed at the beginnings of the surahs in order to serve as separators between them. In this view, the Basmala functions as a marker distinguishing the final verse of one surah from the first verse of the next. As noted by scholars associated with the early qirā'at schools of Madīnah, Shām, and Baṣrah, the function of Basmala in Mus'haf as an inter-surah delimiter becomes especially evident as we study early Quranic manuscripts. Let's now turn to a close examination of these early Quranic manuscripts. This manuscript is housed in the National Library of France. It is copied on parchment in Hijazi script. A paleographic analysis allows us to suggest a plausible date range for its production. Accordingly, it is likely that the manuscript was copied within the first 75 years of the Hijri era, that is, during the earliest period of Islam. The manuscript consists of a total of 56 folios. Each page contains between 22 and 27 lines of text. On the page we are examining, after the final verse of Surah Al-A'raf, وَيُسَبِّحُونَهُ وَلَهُ يَسْجُدُونَ, there appears a verse ending stop, a waqf sign. Following this sign, we see that one line of blank space has been left. After this gap, the Basmala is written. However, a particularly noteworthy point is that this manuscript contains no heading or title to indicate the beginning of a new surah. As a result, it is not immediately clear where one surah ends and the next begins. Now, let's hypothetically consider that the Basmala had not been written in the following line. In that case, the manuscript would appear to continue directly from وَيُسَبِّحُونَهُ وَلَهُ يَسْجُدُونَ to يَسْأَلُونَكَ عَنِ الْأَنْفَالِ without any clear demarcation between the end of one surah and the beginning of the next. If one is not attentive, these two verses could easily be perceived as consecutive verses from the same surah. However, the Basmala inserted between them clearly indicates that a new surah begins at this point. The approaches of Madīnah, Shām, and Baṣrah schools of qirā'at regarding the function of Basmala in the Mus'haf are likewise informed by such elements, examples of which we will explore further. At the part where we see the Basmala in this manuscript, there are neither vowel marks, harakat, nor diacritical dots, i'jam, that distinguish the essential character of the letters. When we examine the word bism, alif after the letter b is not visible. The teeth of the sin are quite faint, difficult to discern. In the word ar-Rahman, we observe that the scribe has omitted the alif altogether. As noted earlier in our review of the literature, this offers empirical evidence that in early Islamic tradition, the alif in this expression was deliberately elided, that is, intentionally left unwritten. Another noteworthy detail is the presence of a verse ending waqf sign immediately following the Basmala. This sign indicates that in this particular mushaf, the Basmala was explicitly regarded as a verse belonging to Surah Al-Anfal. This in turn suggests that those who transmitted or copied this manuscript were likely adherents of the qirāʻat schools of Kūfa or Makkah. I would also like to highlight a small yet important detail. In early Quranic manuscripts, the person who inserted the verse stops was not always the same individual who copied the manuscript. In these ancient codices, the spacing between two words is often very similar to the spacing between the letters of a single word. This was likely a deliberate scribal strategy, allowing greater flexibility in accommodating waqf signs within a written line. Our next manuscript is preserved in Yemen at al-Makhṭūṭāt. Based on paleographic analysis, it can be dated to within the first 75 years of Hijri calendar. Written in Hijazi script on parchment, the manuscript comprises 40 folios, with each page containing between 14 and 27 lines. The section we will focus on here contains the opening of chapter 10, Yunus. As we can see in this manuscript, immediately following the final phrase of verse 129 of chapter 9, وَهُوَ رَبُّ الْعَرْشِ الْعَظِيمِ, there is a ta'shir mark, a symbol traditionally placed every 10 verses. After this ta'shir, there is a noticeable space left in the original writing. The scribe then begins a new line with the Basmala. When we look at the surah heading right next to the ta'shir, we find the phrase فاتحة سورة يونس وهي 109 آيات. However, it is highly likely that this heading was added later, as the script is visibly different. From a paleographic perspective, this phrase exhibits characteristics of a later hand. At this point, we can say that the Basmala on the lower line, part of the original writing, functions as a visual divider between the surahs. Following this Basmala, chapter 10, Yunus, begins with the verse Alif Lam Ra, Tilka Ayatul Kitab al-Hakim. Upon examining the Basmala here, we notice that there is no visible alif in either Bismi or Ar-Rahman. Additionally, the teeth of the letter Sin are written in a very clear manner. It should be also noted that there is no i'jam on the Basmala line. Our next manuscript is preserved in the Cadbury Research Library at the University of Birmingham. This manuscript is among the examples that reflect the transitional phase from Hijazi script to Kufi script. According to François Deroche's paleographic classification, this manuscript belongs to the Kufi B.Ia group. So what does this Kufi B.Ia mean? Terms like this, frequently encountered by researchers working on Quranic manuscripts, are used to classify the script style to which the text belongs. This classification is based on detailed observations concerning the writing styles of early Quranic manuscripts. The system was developed primarily through the extensive work carried out by François Deroche in the 80s. By examining the characteristic features of ancient Quranic manuscripts, especially those held in the National Library of France, Deroche established a paleographic system that is still widely referenced today. In this context, the term Kufi B.Ia is not just a technical label, but a paleographic indicator that situates a manuscript within the historical development of Arabic script. The term Kufi denotes the overall angular and classical character of the writing, while B.Ia refers to a more narrowly defined subgroup within this style. This subgroup is especially notable for its more proportioned, orderly, and measured script compared to Hijazi. So Kufi B.Ia represents a transitional script style that moves away from the free-flowing and asymmetrical nature of Hijazi, but has not yet fully reached the geometric precision of the classical Kufi style. In this regard, the manuscript serves as an important example for understanding the development of script in early Quranic manuscripts. The main features of the Kufi B.Ia script style can be summarized as follows. Letters are written with more upright and defined angles compared to Hijazi script. One of its most distinctive features is that the letters alif, ta, and va are written with a slight rightward slant compared to other letters. The tail ends of the letters jim, ha, and kha at the end of words often take on a hook-like shape. Based on these features, the manuscript can be dated to the second half of the first Hijri century or the first half of the second century. On folio 3R, that is the recto side of the third folio, we see the phrase Wallahu bi kulli shay'in alim. What particularly stands out in this line is the fact that the hamza in the word shay' is not visible. At the end of this line, chapter 4 An-Nisa concludes. Adjacent to it, we notice a visible blank space. Below this space, the Basmalah appears. After the manuscript was copied, this initially blank area was filled in with the following phrase: فاتحة سورة المائدة وهي 220 و100 آية. It is quite likely that this phrase contains an error. From a grammatical standpoint, the word mi'atain in the nominative case is incorrect here. There is no reason to read it as accusative or genitive either. Moreover, within the Islamic tradition, there is no known version of Surah Al-Ma'idah consisting of over 200 verses. It appears that after the word Ashrun, a second mi'ah was added in an attempt to correct the mistake. However, this too is problematic. In Arabic, numerical expressions must follow the sequence of hundreds, then units, then tens. One could attempt to read the phrase as هي 22 و100 آية, but even this contains grammatical problems. Nevertheless, with this correction, the scribe seems to have intended to indicate that the Surah Al-Ma'idah consists of 120 or 122 verses. We also observe that a horizontal line was drawn beneath the surah heading. This practice is found in a significant number of early Quranic Codices. Early Islamic sources include narrations about drawing lines between surahs, and this manuscript provides empirical evidence suggesting that such traditions were taken seriously in the early period. As for the Basmalah on the page, we observe, as also noted in the classical literature, that the alif is omitted in both Bism and Ar-Rahman. Additionally, there is no verse-ending symbol immediately following the Basmalah. Our next manuscript is a codex preserved in Austrian National Library, consisting of 104 folios. Copied onto parchment, each page of this manuscript contains 15 lines and is written in early Kufic script. Paleographically, it can be dated to the 2nd century AH. On folio 40 verso, we see the conclusion of the 3rd chapter, Al-Imran, and the beginning of the 4th chapter, An-Nisa. The surah heading states that chapter of An-Nisa consists of 177 verses, a number that corresponds with the view of qirāʻat schools of Shām. When we examine the Basmalah in this manuscript, we observe, consistent with previous examples, that the alif is orthographically absent in both Bism and Ar-Rahman. Notably, a dot appears at the end of the word Ar-Rahim, though this is not a verse-ending mark. Instead, it appears to indicate a dhamma, a vowel mark. Therefore, in this manuscript, it remains unclear whether Basmalah was regarded as a verse in chapter 4, Surah An-Nisa. Now, let's turn to another Quranic manuscript housed in the National Library of France. This ancient codex, written in Kufic script and copied on parchment, consists of a total of 101 folios. Aesthetically, it appears more refined than the earlier examples we've seen. Various ornaments are also present throughout the manuscript. On the page we examined, the end of chapter 8, Al-Anfal, and the beginning of chapter 9, At-Tawbah, appear together. It is likely that the surah heading was added later. However, because the script used closely resembles the overall style of the manuscript, it would not be accurate to assume this addition was made much later. This manuscript can be dated between the late 2nd and early 4th century AH. The heading at the top of the examined page reads, Fatihatu Surat At-Tawbah 130 ayah. As noted in the Islamic tradition, the Basmalah does not appear at the beginning of Surah At-Tawbah. This is clearly reflected in the manuscript, where no Basmalah is present. Taking this and many other early Quranic manuscripts into account, we can say that this information from classical Islamic literature is well attested by empirical evidence. Let's now take a look at another Kufic manuscript housed in the Cambridge University Library. Paleographically, this manuscript can be dated between the 3rd and 4th centuries AH. It belongs to the Abbasid period, and 96 folios of it have survived to the present day. Each page contains 7 lines of text. As you may have noticed, the first Quranic manuscript we examined in this video has a relatively modest aesthetic compared to this one. That earlier manuscript contained up to 27 lines per page, leaving almost no empty space. In contrast, this codex follows a highly aesthetic layout with only 7 lines per page. This shift can be linked both to the technical and material limitations of earlier periods and to the historical development of the Arabic script. In the page we are examining, the surah heading immediately draws attention. A dedicated space was reserved for the heading during the copying process, when the text reads Yunus 109 ayat. We notice here that the alif is omitted in the word ayat. A similar omission appears in the Basmalah on this page. Upon closer examination, we see, as in previous examples, that the alif is not written in either Bism or Ar-Rahman. These features are in fact deeply rooted in ancient Semitic writing systems. In languages such as Umayyad, no additional letter is used to indicate a long vowel. The correct pronunciation is expected from the reader's familiarity with the language and text. It is reasonable to suggest that the same principle applies in these early Quranic manuscripts as well. Turning to the Basmalah, we note that the teeth of the letter Sin are clearly sharply rendered. Verse endings are marked with gilded circular ornaments. Additionally, we observe that the first verse stop on this page occurs after the phrase Alif Lam Ra Tilka Ayatul Kitab al-Hakim, while no verse stop appears immediately after the Basmalah. Today we have traced the historical journey of the Basmalah from its earlier invocation Bismikallāhumma to its later function as a divider between surahs in the Quran. From tiny inscriptions on the edges of the coins to the interlinear spaces of early Quranic manuscripts, we have followed its historical development together. These ancient codices are not just religious texts, but they are also empirical evidence for the study of history, historical linguistics of Arabic, and cultural heritage. In this context, Basmalah serves not only as a prayer, but also as a unique window into the textual culture of early Islam. If you watched the video so far and found any value in it, hit that subscribe button and give it a thumbs up. See you in the next video.